With that, I'll throw it off to Mike.
Thanks, Phil. So my name is Mike Lambert, and I manage the IMS portfolio for Alcatel Lucent for enterprise and IMS solutions. And I'm happy to be here to talk to you about how we see WebRTC playing out. I was told that this sound system was a little quiet, so I'll try to speak up. Hopefully everyone will be able to hear me. We're excited about WebRTC, and I think everyone in this room is excited about WebRTC because we believe and understand, or at least hope, that WebRTC is going to bring to communications what the web brought to the internet generally. And specifically for WebRTC, we talk about more communications in more places. And what we see WebRTC doing for delivering that are two things, and it's widening the developer pool and lowering the cost of delivery. And that allows you to start doing some compelling things. But I'm not going to try to boil the ocean today in terms of talking about all the use cases or all the models that WebRTC can be deployed in. I'm going to focus in on two specific areas that we've been working on very closely and share with you some of the thoughts that we've heard from the community and what we're seeing as trends in the area of service providers and large enterprises. So starting with service providers, we see that WebRTC is an extension of what is already going on with the development of downloadable clients for multiple devices so that the service provider can extend their use case services to tablets and other types of devices. WebRTC allows us to extend that even further. From a consumer perspective, this has the opportunity to be exciting to the consumer in that they'll be able to consume services from that they get from the service provider, their communication services that they get from their service providers in more and more places and in the web environment and the web community. Note, they will be able to choose to do that and not be forced to do that, which I think is a change in terms of how people across the industry and across communications are looking at how communications is going to be consumed. We believe that there's going to be a significant opportunity for consumers that are going to be interested in choosing those continued uses of services for ubiquity, ease of use, and continuous reachability. From the service provider perspective, as consumers move more and more of their capabilities to the web, this is one more service and capability that allows service providers to move their offering into web access and web services delivery. We see service providers looking at opportunities to do that outside the field of communications. WebRTC and these capabilities add to that suite of services that make it attractive for a consumer to use their mobile subscriber identity or another service provider provided identity when they move around the web and have communication services. We also see an opportunity for application developers who aren't necessarily communications applications developers, who'd rather be able to provide their users of that application communication services that customer has already chosen to use. And that could be from their service provider, and that could certainly be from other entities as well. And all of this comes at a very interesting time for the service provider in how their business model is changing. This is a graph from Chetan Sharma about how we're entering into what he calls a fourth wave of innovation and cycles in the business model for service providers. And you can see that the first three of these waves, voice, messaging, and access, were focused on delivery of a single service. So the organizations that were built, the business metrics that were created, and the delivery models that were associated with that were highly integrated and focused on making sure that that one service or two services worked flawlessly across hundreds of millions of people. What we see now is that moving into this fourth wave, that we're actually looking at multiple services delivered across three different models. We have a utility model, which would be something like you consider bandwidth, of course. An enabler model, and we see conversations about exposing APIs. There's a lot of discussion about that. There's been attempts at that. There's been things that have had challenges, and we've had a couple of starts on that, but we're continuing to move forward with the idea of creating APIs and allowing third parties to develop applications for these services. And then finally, the finished goods, the end user service. And what I find interesting about this model is not only does it apply to our industry, but if you look at something like how Amazon is running their business, they have their AWS cloud services, they provide back-end services for smaller retailers that exist on the Amazon site, and of course, they sell you anything you could possibly imagine, including groceries now. But what this shows also is that moving to these small number of services mean that we have a lot of things to change. And how we go to market with services changes pretty dramatically when you look at multiple services that have different time frames associated with them that need to be ramped up quickly or ramped down quickly based on how they're used and consumed. So how do WebRTC fit into these changes? Well, the first thing is, so WebRTC provides some great capabilities and services, but how do we plug that into a network? How does it fit into a communication strategy as a service provider? Where does it fit in? Do you create a new network? Do you not? How does that actually happen? And then, how does this WebRTC capability, this browser-based communications, fit into the strategy of moving beyond the existing boundaries of your brand today? Looking at the opportunity to provide services outside of what we traditionally consider the boundary of a service provider, i.e. their access. And we can see this happening in multiple different domains where service providers are experimenting, looking at, and actually offering services across in an OTT environment. So, Verizon's partnership with Redbox is a perfect example of that, where they provide streaming services in context, in common with the Redbox DVD delivery, and those streaming services are going to be available over the top as well. And finally, how do we look at IT services in the enterprise domain, and where does the network fit in with that from a communications perspective? Because as applications become more browser-centric, the opportunity to integrate communications more closely with those IT applications becomes an attractive opportunity. At Alcatel Lucent, we talk about this in the context of providing a platform-based approach that we call one open offer. And in our case, this is a combination of IMS and WebRTC. There's certainly other network models that are possible, but we believe that from a platform approach where you have one network, where you take your communication strategy and leverage that across the multiple different access domains, you get the greatest value for what you as a service provider are bringing to market. And then open, the ability to expand the reach of your network with a combination of WebRTC, JavaScript libraries, and REST-based libraries, as well as network APIs, so call control APIs. The combination of these two things enable you to open up your network to new capabilities. Offer. So how do you take this and compete with one IT communications integrated solution that provides the ability to take what the relationship that you have with enterprises on a communications basis and merge that with this incoming AT&T, excuse me, that was a slip of the tongue, an IT-based solution. So the first question that we ask and we get asked is, so what does WebRTC actually change for enterprise communications? And some critics will say, there's really nothing new here. We've done all this before. We can do this with downloadable clients. And in some ways, the critics have a point in the context of how enterprise communications is structured today. And if you were to simply take that model and put WebRTC browser-based clients on top of these individual islands of communications. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the islands at this point. You see that you have in the gray the traditional communication services, desktop, UC, and call center services, and then this new category in blue of business applications, where we're finding that marketing departments, HR departments, sales departments are going out and buying business applications, not asking the IT department for permission to do so, and not being stopped from doing so when the IT department complains. Now, these applications have IM and presence built into them, and they have communications capabilities as well. And so, while that's great, right, no problem with that whatsoever, everybody gets to use what they want to do. Well, it turns out in a large enterprise scenario, this actually has some very significant problems for the enterprise, because the ability to move a session between these islands becomes very complicated, and in some case fails, and in some case requires dropping back even to the PSTN because these systems are incompatible with each other. And the problem that comes into that is that communications sessions provide a lot of context for data sessions and data analytics associated with calls moving through the enterprise. And without that context, the ability to do cross-selling becomes a challenge. And more importantly, for everyone who's been through a call center experience, it means that you get to enter your account number 15, 20 times, depending upon how many different customer service reps you get transferred to. So it does actually matter to the enterprises that they can't be able to get the context from one of these islands to the other. And the second aspect of this that's very important is operational. From an operations perspective, managing all of these islands independently becomes very problematic, such that they cannot come up with a common platform across all the different islands in order to create a bridge solution that crosses them without getting vendor upgrades coming into the mix and upsetting the whole apple cart. And they're really finding a situation where IT is falling further behind with every new vendor software release. So large enterprises have seen this challenge and are looking at what we're calling a platform-based approach to communications, where platform communications becomes a horizontal layer in their network that can be accessed by multiple applications across with multiple capability sets. You can integrate with SIP trunking, you can integrate with features from a traditional application server, and you can also integrate with APIs in order to provide call control directly to these new business applications. We're seeing a very strong interest in IMS session management for this capability because of standards support for it, because of reliability, because of robustness, as well as the vendor and endpoint agnostic nature of it that allows the system to be used by multiple vendors across their network, as well as outside of the context of a traditional endpoint service delivery. Going back to WebRTC and how the IT departments that we've been talking with about this see WebRTC fitting into this platform-based model, we can see that WebRTC creates an opportunity to take these IT applications that are moving to a browser-based delivery model and pull into that the communications capability. And particularly exciting about WebRTC is this model around low investment. So if you look at first the platform-based structure of the model and then add in the client capability or the endpoint capability and having the opportunity to just use APIs on top of a stable platform, that enables an investment profile for new services to be reduced dramatically and allows a lot more opportunity for innovation and service creation, ideation, and ultimately being more flexible to the business needs. Specifically, providing services back to the marketing department, to the sales department, to the HR department, with the applications that they've chosen, because most of the modern applications have these browser-based capability sets in them, and integrate that back into a repeatable, cost-efficient, and controlled communications environment. I'm going to talk about a couple of use cases now. First, a healthcare use case. And this is an example of an enterprise use case. And we can see, as you'd expect, the ability to use WebRTC to push communication services across a conversation that a doctor is having with a patient and a consulting with a nurse. And what you see is the ability to have the patient record management system integrated with the communication service. Across the top of this slide, I have shown these APIs. It's not working. These APIs showing how you have network call control APIs, plus the WebRTC capabilities in order to complete delivery of the service. We had the opportunity to talk with a surgeon who works at a hospital and he's a specialist surgeon who was responsible for some very expensive but very important surgeries. And the hospital was looking at ways to make this surgeon more available for consults across a wider across a wider number of hospitals in the campus, and looking at video conferencing for that. So looked at a special purpose-built video application that would allow the doctor to have anonymity as well as reachability in the service and a very simple clicking interface. So we showed that service to the surgeon, and he was very excited about it. But the first question he asked was, why do I have to go to a separate video session system for this? Why can't I just do that directly out of my patient record management system? If I was in the patient record management system, I could look at the charts, I could look at the different x-rays, I could pull up the data, and then I could have direct access to the communication session as well. And what's important in that is that two things. One, that the surgeon immediately recognized the value proposition of WebRTC in my view. And it's the ability to create a direct linkage between the communications and the business process. And two, he didn't ask to take the patient record management system and put it in a UC solution. He asked for the opposite. And I think that that's an important thing for us to understand as communications people, largely in this audience, is that we need to be able to take communication services and build those into IT applications for the enterprises. That's what they're asking us to do. Going back to the consumer, we see the multi-screen communications case, and I think we've all seen this case many times and had the opportunity to talk about it and think about it. Service providers are launching these capabilities. They're in various stages of that. Around the world, we see the interest in this multi-screen capability just increasing over time. And if you look again back to other types of services, certainly in the video consumption space, service providers are doing this for their customers today. But in addition to these use cases that we see here, the ability to take the communication session off of a device and into the web and take your communication context with you as you do so becomes very interesting. So from a web developer perspective, again, outside of the model of a communications-interested web application person who's thinking of building up a network and a community and a communications, but just wants their user to have communication services as part of the experience of being in that application. Imagine the opportunity for them to take a code library that they put into their site, and then the user is allowed to just put in their mobile phone number or any other phone number, and that is able to then identify and go back from that application and pull in all the context of that communications capabilities that subscriber has. That's a very easy use case for a lot of people who aren't necessarily going to be as interested in managing their communications on a day-to-day or in a multivariate environment. And it does not mean that there aren't going to be multiple opportunities for how communications is consumed. Certainly people have multiple identities. But this is one area where we see an opportunity for service providers to take their identity and their strengths in that area and push into the web environment and give customers the opportunity to choose that. The opportunity to choose that, not forcing them to do it, but we see the opportunity and the capability for the service providers to execute on this because the communications complexity for many is beyond what they really feel like handling or understanding. We have a demo here with a company called Vobi. We're in the far back corner over here, tucked way back, but I think we've had a few people already stop by. And this demo shows what happens when you can bring together the idea of identity, context, WebRTC, and service set over a service provider IMS network. And we have a demo up on the stage at 6 p.m. tonight. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And so if you haven't had the opportunity to go over to the booth or check it out at the demo. So there's a lot of discussion about a lot of different topics today or this week. And one of the questions that we've been asked is, so what does a backend look like to support WebRTC? And in the cases that we're talking about of the service provider and the large enterprise, we really see these elements as being very important for that. So the WebRTC library, so the ability to create the connectivity between the WebRTC browser-based capabilities and the network is obviously very important. We see the need for this WebRTC border controller capability and network APIs for call control management from a core network infrastructure. And in the context of where we're seeing next generation service provider networks as well as large enterprise networks, that is we're seeing a lot of the IMS network as being delivered in that model. And finally, of course, a developer portal. So the capability set of your traditional developer portal, so having access to the APIs, having access to forums, those types of things, all necessary as part of supporting a WebRTC service. And what I wanted to close with was all this needs to be scaled as part of a cloud-based solution. And cloud's been talked about in its old hat in terms of a lot of conversations, but we're still at an early day from a deployment perspective in the context of the service provider and large enterprises with respect to communications. But as we move forward and as the networks become less deterministic and the need to create repeatable models for delivering these multiple services across various use cases and capability sets, we need to move from what we're seeing we need to move from cost reduction to rapid service creation. And this is not dissimilar from what we're already seeing playing out in the large enterprise space, where you start with the business case associated with delivering capabilities around cost reduction, and then you use that to extend the services towards the future and generate new revenues and new service opportunities. The final point I'd like to make is that what we see is very exciting about having this combination of the network APIs and the WebRTC endpoint is this low cost to innovate. That is something that has been a challenge in large enterprises and service providers, and by having the ability to decouple the APIs as well as the endpoints from the core networks and the necessary complexity, cost, and integration timelines associated with upgrading that core network, the opportunity to deliver new innovative services in a rapid time frame, in a web service type time frame, is something that's new and is going to be an excellent opportunity for the service providers and large enterprises to provide innovative services to the market much more quickly. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed your lunch conversation, and I hope that I'm a little bit ahead of time, but I appreciate the time having the opportunity to talk to you.